It started out like any other day for Sarah. She was busy with work, balancing the usual flood of emails, meetings, and phone calls. The city was buzzing outside her apartment, but inside she enjoyed the quiet hum of her workspace. However, that silence was about to be broken in a way she never expected. One evening, as Sarah was winding down from a long day, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and saw something odd. Her own number was calling her. At first, she thought it must be some sort of prank or technical glitch. She had heard about scam calls where the caller ID gets spoofed, so she simply ignored it, assuming it was nothing serious. But the phone rang again, same number. This time, curiosity got the better of her, and she hesitantly picked it up. "Hello?" she said, her voice tinged with confusion. No response. Only static crackled faintly on the other end of the line. After a moment of silence, she could just barely make out a faint, muffled sound, like someone trying to speak, but the words were distorted, lost in the static. "Who is this?" she asked, her heart now beating a little faster. But there was no answer, only more static. Eventually, the call cut off, leaving Sarah staring at her phone, feeling unsettled but trying to shake it off. The next day passed uneventfully, and Sarah almost forgot about the strange call until it happened again that evening. This time, the phone rang late at night, long after Sarah had climbed into bed. Groggy, she picked up her phone and saw her number flashing on the screen once more. Dread crept in. She let it ring, hoping it would stop on its own. But when the call persisted, she finally answered. "Hello? Who's there?" Sarah said, now more insistent. The static returned, but this time, something was different. Between the crackles, she could hear what sounded like distant whispers. They were faint, almost too quiet to make out, but they were undeniably human. The voice on the other end sounded familiar, though she couldn't place it. Her hands trembled as she held the phone to her ear, straining to hear the words. But just as quickly as it started, the call ended again. Shaken, Sarah checked her phone's call log, and sure enough, her number had been listed as the caller. Confusion and fear swirled in her mind, but she convinced herself it was just a prank or a technical glitch. The next night, as Sarah sat at her dining table, the phone rang again, her number, just as before. This time she didn't hesitate. She answered immediately. "Who is this?" "Stop calling me," she demanded, her voice shaking with frustration and fear. For a moment there was nothing but the familiar static, but then, there it was. A voice, quiet at first and then clearer, like a radio tuning in to the right frequency. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized it. It was her mother's voice. Sarah. Her mother had passed away 3 years ago. "Mom?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands were clammy and her pulse raced in her ears. The voice came again, more distinct this time, though it wavered as though coming from far away. "Sarah? I've been trying to reach you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This had to be a dream or some cruel prank, but the voice was unmistakable. It was her mother, speaking softly, just as she had when she was alive. "I miss you," the voice continued. It sounded sad, distant, like an echo from the past. Sarah felt her legs weaken, and she sank down into a chair. "Mom? How is this possible? What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. But the connection began to fade, the static growing louder. The last thing Sarah heard before the call disconnected was her mother's voice whispering, "Come find me." Terrified yet desperate for answers, Sarah couldn't shake the haunting phone calls. She knew she had to figure out what was happening. The following day, She searched through old family records, photos, and even her mother's belongings, hoping to uncover some clue. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That night, the phone rang again, her number flashing on the screen like a dark omen. Sarah answered, already expecting the static and the whispers. But this time, the voice was clearer than before. "I need you to come," her mother's voice urged, a sense of urgency in her tone. "To the old house, please." Sarah's childhood home had been sold years ago after her mother passed away, but she knew it was the only place left to search for answers. With a mix of dread and determination, she decided to visit the house the next day. The house stood at the edge of town, weathered by time, but still holding the memories of Sarah's childhood. She hadn't been back since her mother's death, but as she approached, a sense of unease settled over her. The air felt thick, as if the past still lingered within the walls. Inside, the house was dark and empty, with dust covering the old furniture. Sarah moved slowly, her heart racing as she walked through the familiar rooms. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe a sign, maybe a memory. As she reached her mother's old bedroom, her phone rang once more. Her heart leapt into her throat as she saw her number again on the screen. She answered, her hand trembling. "Mom?" she whispered. The voice was clearer than ever now. "I'm here, Sarah. I never left." Suddenly the room grew cold and a strange presence filled the air. Sarah's breath hitched as she felt something brush past her, something unseen. The mirror on the wall fogged up, and slowly words began to appear, written as if by an invisible hand. "I've been waiting." Sarah stumbled back, her mind racing. Her mother's voice echoed in her ears. "You must let go. It's time." And then, just as quickly as the presence had come, it vanished. The air grew still. The phone, still clutched in Sarah's hand, went dead. After that night, the phone calls stopped. The static, the whispers, everything went quiet. Sarah knew, deep down, that her mother had been trying to send her a message. Maybe her mother's spirit had been stuck, lingering in the past, and by visiting the old house, Sarah had finally helped her move on. The experience left Sarah shaken, but also with a sense of closure. She never received another call from her own number again. The house, now just a memory, remained quiet and untouched, as if whatever had been haunting it was finally at rest. But every now and then, in the stillness of the night, Sarah could swear she heard the faint echo of her mother's voice, reminding her that love, even in death, never truly fades. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal for Sarah. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Like a door between worlds had briefly opened and closed. The mystery of those haunted phone calls remained unsolved, and part of her feared she might never know the full truth. And then, one quiet evening, Sarah's phone stood on the coffee table. She looked down. Her number was calling,